Lake Chad is a historically large, shallow, endorheic lake in Africa, which has varied in size over the centuries. According to the Global Resource Information Database of the United Nations Environment Programme, it shrank by as much as 95% from about 1963 to 1998, but the 2007 image shows significant improvement over previous years. Lake Chad is economically important, providing water to more than 68 million people living in the 4 countries surrounding it on the edge of the Sahara Desert. It is the largest lake in the Chad Basin. Geography and hydrology. Lake Chad is mainly in the far west of Chad, bordering on northeastern Nigeria. The Chari River, fed by its tributary the Logon, provides over 90% of the lake's water, with a small amount coming from the Yobe River in Nigeria, Niger. Despite high levels of evaporation, the lake is fresh water. Over half of the lake's area is taken up by its many small islands, reed beds and mud banks, and a belt of swampland across the middle divides the northern and southern halves. The shorelines are largely composed of marshes. Because Lake Chad is very shallow, only 10.5 meters at its deepest, its area is particularly sensitive to small changes in average depth, and consequently it also shows seasonal fluctuations in size. Lake Chad has no apparent outlet, but its waters percolate into the Sahara and Bodea depressions. The climate is dry most of the year, with moderate rainfall from July through September. History. Lake Chad gave its name to the country of Chad. The name Chad is a local word meaning large expansive water, in other words, a lake. Lake Chad is the remnant of a former inland sea, Paleolake Megachad. At its largest, sometime before 5000 BC, Lake Megachad was the largest of 4 Saharan paleolakes, and is estimated to have covered an area of 1 million square kilometers, larger than the Caspian Sea is today, and may have extended as far northeast as within 100 kilometers of Fire Largo. At its largest extent, the river Maoke-Ikut-BBI represented the outlet of the Paleolake Megachad, connecting it to the Niger River and the Atlantic. The presence of African manatees in the inflows of Lake Chad is an evidence of that history. Lake Chad was first surveyed from shore by Europeans in 1823, and it was considered to be one of the largest lakes in the world then. In 1851, a party including the German explorer Heinrich Barth carried a boat overland from Tripoli across the Sahara Desert by camel and made the first European waterborne survey. British expedition leader James Richardson died just days before reaching the lake. In Winston Churchill's book, The River War, an account of the reconquest of the Sudan, published in 1899, Churchill specifically mentions the shrinking of Lake Chad. He writes, "Altogether France has enough to occupy her in Central Africa for some time to come, and even when the long task is finished, the conquered regions are not likely to be of great value. They include the desert of the Great Sahara and wide expanses of equally profitless scrubber marsh. Only one important river, the Shari, flows through them, and never reaches the sea, and even Lake Chad, into which the Shari flows, appears to be leaking through some subterranean exit, and is rapidly changing from a lake into an immense swamp." Lake Chad has shrunk considerably since the 1960s, when its shoreline had an elevation of about 286 meters above sea level and it had an area of more than 26,000 square kilometers, making its surface the 4th largest in Africa. An increased demand on the lake lake's water from the local population has likely accelerated its shrinkage over the past 40 years. The size of Lake Chad greatly varies seasonally with the flooding of the wetlands areas. In 1983, Lake Chad was reported to have covered 10,000 to 25,000 square kilometers, had a maximum depth of 11 meters, and a volume of 72 cubic kilometers. By 2000, its extent had fallen to less than 1,500 square kilometers. A 2001 study published in the Journal of Geophysical Research blamed the lake's retreat largely on overgrazing in the area surrounding the lake, causing desertification and a decline in vegetation. The United Nations Environment Programme and the Lake Chad Basin Commission concur that at least half of the lake's decrease is attributable to shifting climate patterns. UNEP blames human water use, such as inefficient damming and irrigation methods, for the rest of the shrinkage. As late as December 2014, Lake Chad was still sufficient in size and volume such that boats could capsize or sink. The European Space Agency has recently presented data showing an actual increase in lake extent of Lake Chad between the years of 1985 to 2011. Referring to the floodplain as a lake may be misleading, as less than half of Lake Chad is covered by water through an entire year. The remaining sections are wetlands. A wetland is an area of land with its soil saturated with moisture either permanently or seasonally. Such areas may also be covered partially or completely by shallow pools of water. Wetlands include swamps, marshes, and bogs, among others. Lake Chad's volume of 72 cubic kilometers is very small relative to that of Lake Tanganyika and Lake Victoria, African lakes with similar surface areas. Flora. The lake is home to more than 44 species of algae. In particular, it is one of the world's major producers of wild spirulina. The lake also has large areas of swamp and reed beds. The floodplains on the southern lake shore are covered in wetland grasses such as Echinocchia pyramidalis, Vetiveria nigritana, Oryz longus staminata, and Hyparrhenia rufa. Fauna. The entire Lake Chad Basin holds 179 fish species, of which more than half are shared with the Niger River Basin, about half are shared with the Nile River Basin, and about a quarter are shared with the Congo River Basin. Lake Chad itself holds 85 fish species. Of the 25 endemics in the basin, only Brycenus daggeti is found in the lake itself, and it is perhaps better treated as a dwarf subspecies of Brycenus nurse. This relatively low species richness and virtual lack of endemic fish species contrasts strongly with other large African lakes, such as Victoria, Tanganyika, and Malawi. There are many floating islands in the lake. It is home to a wide variety of wildlife, including elephants, hippopotamus, crocodile, and large communities of migrating birds including wintering ducks, ruff and other waterfowl and shorebirds. There are two near-endemic birds in the region, the river prinia and the rusty lark. The shrinking of the lake is threatening nesting sites of the black-crowned crane. During the wet season, fish move into the mineral-rich lake to breed and find food. Carnivorans such as the Central African cheetah, the striped hyena and the caracal used to live at the lake. Threats and preservation. There is some debate over the mechanisms causing the lake's disappearance. The leading theory, which is most often cited by the UN, is that the unsustainable usage of the lake by both governments and local communities has caused the lake to be overused, not allowing it to replenish. Recently, however, an additional theory is gaining traction. This states that European air pollution had shifted rainfall patterns further south, thereby making the region drier and not allowing the lake to replenish. Since the implementation of new regulations in the EU concerning air pollutants, much of this rainfall is now beginning to return. thereby explaining the small improvements observed since 2007. The only protected area is Lake Chad Game Reserve, which covers half of the area next to the lake that belongs to Nigeria. The whole lake has been declared a Ramsar Site of International Importance. Management of the lake plans to divert the Abangi River into Lake Chad were proposed in 1929 by Herman Sorgel in his Atlantropa project and again in the 1960s. A copious amount of water from the Abangi would revitalize the dying Lake Chad and provide livelihood in fishing and enhanced agriculture to tens of millions of Central Africans and Sahelians. Interbasin water transfer schemes were proposed in the 1980s and 1990s by Nigerian engineer J. Umalu and Italian firm Bonifica. In 1994, the Lake Chad Basin Commission proposed a similar project, and at a March 2008 summit, the heads of state of the LCBC member countries committed to the diversion project. In April 2008, the LCBC advertised a request for proposals for a World Bank-funded feasibility study. Neighboring countries have agreed to commit resources to restoring the lake, notably Nigeria. Local impact. Because of the way it has shrunk dramatically in recent decades, the lake has been labeled an ecological catastrophe by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. Human population expansion and unsustainable human water extraction from Lake Chad have caused several natural species to be stressed and threatened by declining lake levels. For example, the decline or disappearance of the endangered painted hunting dog has been noted in the Lake Chad area. The shrinking of the lake has also caused several different conflicts to emerge as to which countries that border Lake Chad have the rights to the remaining water. Along with the conflicts that involve the countries, violence is increasing among the lake's dwellers. Farmers and herders want the water for their crops and livestock and are constantly diverting the water. The fishermen, however, want the remaining water in the lake to stay so they can continue to fish and not have to worry about the lake shrinking more and decreasing their already strained supply of fish. Furthermore, the birds and animals in the area are threatened as they are important sources of food for the local human population.